Hey all, thank you so much for tuning in to our very first episode of the CNS Alumni video series, where we try to highlight prominent CNS alumni and their successes in various fields. My name's Saket.
Richard.
And we're your hosts from the Natural Sciences Council. Our first guest today is Melanie Conway. Melanie, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Melanie Connolly. I'm a medical illustrator with Miko Visuals and Chicago Medical Graphics. And I'm also the marketing director with the Austin Healthcare Council.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. We know you're incredibly busy, and we know you've also done a lot, so we're really happy to have you here. That being said, if you're okay, I just want to go ahead and jump into the first question.
Sounds good.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your time here at UT? Like, what was your major? What were you involved in, et cetera?
Yeah, my major was in neurobiology. I also had a piano background, so I was interested in first and possibly doing some piano as well, but I didn't end up really following that through. But I was in ballroom dance club. Most of my UT experience, it's kind of like my husband had the quintessential UT experience, like went to all the, made so many fun friends, went to so many different events and all those kinds of things. I was working full time while I was at a restaurant 40 hours a week and also in school full time. And so because of that, it was like any extra time that I had was absolutely devoted to studying. So in some ways, I feel like I missed out on that UT experience, especially when my husband would talk about his later. But then when I went to grad school, even though I was still working during grad school, I made sure that I made friends, got out and did things. And then I was able to almost kind of cultivate that UT experience later when I came back. So after grad school, I started getting involved in volunteering with different groups at UT and coming to a bunch of networking events. And I got to start to build the experience that I felt like I didn't really have the time to make when I was in undergrad.
Wow, that's really awesome to hear. I'm really glad you had that second chance to, come back to UT and, rebuild that experience. So
yeah. Well, I mean, not everybody has what's kind of a luxury to be able to not work at the same time during school, but you still have to try to carve out the time to make the memories where you can, because it really is worth it. And there are so many opportunities that even now as a professional, I'm astounded by how many events UT puts on. And as a student, it was just mind-boggling to me. And I was like, I don't have time for any of it. And I think part of me was just almost scared to go and to do the things. And so now I'm not so scared of it. So I would encourage everybody, go do the things. Even if you're scared, you'll meet friends, you'll make connections. And it's such a wonderful ecosystem to get to be a part of.
Yeah, that's a really great advice. Thanks for sharing that, because myself, like, I also know there's like a lot of opportunity here, but oftentimes I'll just, be a little shy and, not take advantage of that. So I'm really glad you said that.
Yeah.
So we can move on to our second question now. We've seen how far you've come since graduating. So I was wondering if you could, tell us a little bit how, you found your career path and, progressed to where you are today.
Absolutely. So when I first graduated, I was really interested in pre-med, and then I was really interested in, or when I was first going through UT, then I was kind of really interested in PA, and I applied to PA school a couple of times, and then I kind of toyed with nursing because I was thinking strictly in terms of bedside healthcare. But then after a while, so my mom is a medical illustrator, and she went through the University of Illinois at Chicago medical illustration program when I was 2. So we like to joke that I actually went through that program twice, because I went through when I was 2 years old, but then I also went through when I was 27, 28 or so. But so when I first graduated, I said, you know what, okay, I need to get some experience working in a hospital and make sure I actually like it. Right. I didn't want to go straight to bedside and then realize, oh, there's something about this that just isn't doing it for me. So I started working at Dell Children's Hospital. I started as a volunteer. I was, just in the gift shop. And then I was moved into the Panda PACU unit, which was our post-anesthesia care and pre-surgical. And so started off in Pandapacu as a volunteer, was running around like crazy, doing lots of work. And then within a couple of weeks, they were like, hey, do you want a job? I said, yes, absolutely. And so I worked with at Dell Children's in the surgical unit for 4 years. And I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved being the quote stuffed animal distributor when kids got out of surgery. I loved being the rainbow popsicle giver, but at the same time, I felt like there was a part of me that wasn't really getting what it needed, this kind of art side that wasn't getting what it really wanted. And so I started taking a couple art classes, just seeing how it went. And at one point, my mom wanted to show me how to run her business. Like I said, she's a medical illustrator. And I always thought of like what she does is very different from my interests. She does a lot of two-dimensional surgical illustration, fetal development images, and things like that. But I was always more kind of, 3D minded. So she wanted to show me how everything was run, and I got really interested in like, how does she make money? How does she build clients? How does she find clients? How does she make the artwork? How does she research it and all that kind of stuff? And after she's kind of showing me how she runs her business in case anything happens to her in the future, and we need to protect her artwork from a proprietary standpoint. She and I went on a walk, and I said, I think if this whole PA school thing doesn't work out for me, I think I really want to do medical illustration. And she'll tell you that she did not say this, but my mom's words were, can you draw? I said, I think so. She goes, okay, we'll take a class. And so I took a drawing class. I'd done a little bit of painting classes, but then I took a drawing class. And it was great. I loved it. I loved getting to do it. It was a part of my science brain that I'd never really tapped into before, because when you're looking at something and you're looking at light on form and how does everything kind of mold together, there's a lot of science and angles and math that your brain goes through. And I really love math. And at a certain point, though, you just have to kind of let all of the thinking part of it go and make something. And so that part was really fun for me. That part was really interesting. And from there, I applied for the biomedical visualization program at UIC, and I was lucky enough to get in, and they taught me a ton. So it was a fun ride, but it was definitely not, I did not wake up thinking, oh, I'm going to be a medical illustrator. It was just not really what I envisioned. But once I saw people doing 3D animation and VR and headsets, and you're in the middle of the human body and like that kind of stuff, I was hooked. I couldn't go back.
Wow, that's honestly really amazing, and definitely not a traditional way to find a career for sure. But it's really interesting that you kind of went through that progression, because I feel like, especially now, not a lot of students are able to really explore what they're passionate about. Or they're, really scared to explore what they're passionate about, or, scared to deviate from the norm, which is a big reason why we want to do this podcast, right? But
Yeah.
it is really impressive that you were able to do that. Along that same line, though, while you were finding your path to graduate school, or even after, did you have any major bumps in the road, or just hardships? And if so, how did you overcome them?
So one of the ones that was particularly difficult was for me, how do I find clients? When I first graduated, we knew that my husband wanted to come back, well, boyfriend at the time. We were engaged and we were coming back to Austin to get married, but we knew we wanted to move back to Austin because we had a lot of family here. But also there are a bunch of different medical schools in Texas. He was applying to medical school. And we wanted to be in-state in Texas for that. So the problem that I kind of ran into was I was really interested in medical animation, and generally medical animation takes, big computers. It takes a lot of servers, it takes render farms, it takes a lot of computing power, it takes teams, right? It takes teams to do the storyboarding and the research and rigging the models and lighting them and animating them and then doing your post-compositing, all of these things along the pipeline. And most of these animation companies are located on the coasts. There weren't really any in Austin. There were a couple in, maybe Houston or Dallas. So I think I ended up applying for probably 70 jobs after I graduated. And everything that I would get a hook on, they'd say, okay, well, we need you to move out to Pennsylvania, or okay, we need you to move out to New York or California or something like that. And I was like, oh, I'm kind of geographically undesirable, and it wasn't quite the time now where you can really make a case for, look at how we can all work from home. Um, and luckily, my mom had been a freelance medical illustrator pretty much since I was a kid. So for about 30 years, she'd done freelance, and she was able to give me a couple pointers. But she had also built her client base in the late 80s and early 90s. So that was very different from trying to build a client base now. So in 2016, in May of 2016, I graduated. We moved down to Austin. And I made my website for my new business. And then I just waited, and I would wait and I'd wait. I'd go, oh, I say, okay, well, somebody will find me, somebody will find me and want my work, and I will make art. But what I found in 2016, for whatever purposes or however people feel about it, social media became a very, very noticeably powerful tool. And I realized that if social media can be that powerful, it can get me a job. So I started figuring out how Twitter worked, how eventually how Instagram worked, really pushing LinkedIn and all those, and developing my brand persona for each one of those. And then the other thing that was really beneficial that I started doing was UT had a ton of different free events. And so I would be, watching on Twitter or something and see a class on transgenic mice and how to obtain a transgenic mouse or proteomics or something like that. And I would just type in, hey, can alumni come to this? And I would go learn how to obtain a transgenic mouse, just because if nothing else, it's fascinating. I might meet people. And it ended up being a great way to start networking. So through one of those, I think it was through the proteomics class, I met the biosciences librarian at UT, Portia Vaughn. And she started introducing me to a couple other people. I went to a couple different UT events. They had a pop-up institute on population health, and just all these different events that I would start to go to. And I started volunteering wherever I could. So it was kind of a mixture of volunteering and networking. And eventually I started volunteering with the Austin Healthcare Council as well. But before that, even, I mean, Texas Health Collab has monthly events that you can go to. I was particularly interested in working in med tech, on like med tech animations. So say somebody has a new spinal device and they want to show you how it works, and they want to show investors how it works. I was interested in making those animations, so you don't just have somebody up on a stage with these little models and these little needles trying to show everybody how it works. You can blow it up on this big screen and have a beautiful background. It's all really clean. That's what I was particularly interested in making. And so I started going to those medtech events, and then eventually, met people from the Austin Healthcare Council and started volunteering with them too.
Well, thank you so much for just sharing all of that, and being so open to your journey through those challenges. Yeah, it's really awesome to hear that you utilize just all these opportunities through online platforms that we have that are so prevalent now today, and just learn through them, and got opportunities through them as well. So
yeah. And it
really...
can sound overwhelming. I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's like it's not all of them at once. You pick up one, you get familiar with it, and then you go, oh, okay, there's this event, I can go to this. And you have to kind of psych yourself up. You have to have pretty business cards with you wherever you go. I mean, I was on a wine tour in California once, and I met an anatomist on the same bus, and I handed her my card, and we ended up doing a project together. Like part of networking is just always knowing that it could happen at any time, and being open to that, because especially when you're in kind of a visual career path, everybody's got an animation bouncing around in their head. Everybody's got that one thing that, oh, if you could just make this and I could show it to people, that would take 30 minutes out of my day every day, or whatever it is. And so kind of teasing those, what are your dream projects, out of people, that's a lot of the fun of it.
Yeah, again, that's really great to hear. And just thank you so much for sharing that once again. So you've kind of talked a lot about your path with medical illustration and how you got involved in it and why you got involved in it. I was wondering, I guess, if there's any advice that you would have for any UT students, because I know there are many students that, in college in general who are, pursuing sciences, but are also interested in the arts, right? But oftentimes, they will abandon the arts for, trying to pursue the sciences, even though if they don't want to. So
Right.
as someone, who has, beautifully combined both in, one career, I guess my question to you is, what advice would you have for, any students out there right now
Mm.
who are kind of struggling between the divide,
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're particularly interested in art and science, scientific illustration, medical illustration is a great way to do it. One of the things that my mom likes to push is the idea that you can make money in art. You actually can do it. And a lot of times we'll have from, parents or family members or whatever, we'll have this kind of idea in our heads of the starving artist and things like that. But, medical illustrators are by far some of the highest paid artists in the art world because we have a pretty high level of expertise. Part of what drew me to it as well was not just the work that my mom did, but getting to see the level of understanding she had to have, because it's not just a doctor tells her what the surgery is and she draws it. She has to go see it. She has to understand how they do it. And she has to understand what it looks like if you were to take a lot of the extraneous parts out. So she should be able to, in essence, look at it and really understand what this procedure is step by step all the way through, because otherwise you can't teach it. You can't teach something that you don't entirely understand. And so getting to that level of how do you build it? How do you make it? How do you figure out how the camera is going to sweep around in a way that's both pretty and really engaging, but also really tells the story and gets to the right points. There's so much balance in it that's really fun. And that's part of why I love what I do, because it's always different. I never know what's going to come through my door. But I'd also recommend, try to find as many different diverse mentors who are at different points in their career as you can. And the best way to do that is through networking, right? And sometimes we think of mentors as, the person that's all the way ahead in their career, that is exactly the career that I want, that is where I want to go. I think a lot of times the ones that are a bit more nebulous, I don't know if I exactly want to go in that career path, but I think it's really interesting. And I kind of want to find out how other people got there, and understanding that some people are the ones who will go, this is exactly what I want. This is where I want to go. This is what I want to be. I want to live here and have these kids and, have this career, and here are all the steps that I'm going to take to get there, and I'm going to get there. But there's something to be said for the beauty of a Forrest Gump type career, where you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to put a bunch of energy into a bunch of different things, and I'm going to kind of spread it all out however I can, but I'm excited for whatever it becomes. But really, over the next year, I have no idea what it's going to be. And that's kind of how I try to attack it. I'll look back and go, wow, I did a lot of things. It could have gone sideways. It could have gone anyway. It could have been so many different career paths, but trying not to be too tied down in terms of what I want it to be, and instead go, ooh, this looks cool. This looks fun. Let's go that way. And kind of leaning into those branchy bets wherever you can, because that's where you find a lot of the most serendipitous things. I would have never imagined doing some of the work that I do with the Austin Healthcare Council right now. That was well outside of my wheelhouse. But now that I'm involved in it, I can't imagine stepping away from it. I really love it. So
I
yeah,
feel
be flexible.
honestly, I feel like that's just some really really amazing for CNS students to hear, because I know a lot of them feel like they're falling behind when they don't have like this defined path and everything really out there. And I actually had a friend who I was talking to before this interview, and she was kind of on the same thing. She's like, I'm going to career services. I'm not really sure what I want to do. Everything seems like it's falling apart. And,
Yes.
dealing with all that anxiety is really tough. So I'm really glad that at least you had that experience, and like how rewarding it was
yes.
for you.
Yes, and imposter syndrome is real, right? Like when I first I worked at Dell Children's for 4 years, and when I first got into grad school, for the biomedical visualization program. My first day, I was sitting there going like, oh my gosh, I am so much older than all of these kids. I'm an entire, I think it was 27 years old. How dare I even be here? They've all gone from high school to undergrad straight into grad school. They're all 22, 23, that kind of thing. And I was like, I wasted so much time. I kept thinking, gosh, I wasted so much time working in the hospital. And then one of our first, I think we were talking about health equity and the gaps between what we thought we knew and what we actually know about patients. I was one of the few people to go, oh, I've seen a patient who had that, or I worked with patients, or I know what those educational gaps are, right? And one of the big things for me was that we would see in the children's hospital, you'd see parents who bring in their kids and tell them, okay, so we're going to have a surgery, but and we would talk to them as well. We would have child life talk to them to kind of assuage the kids' fears, let them know that you're going to be under anesthesia, but you're going to be safe. The nurses or the doctor is going to put some medication through the straw in your arm is the term we would use. And then when you wake up, there's a nurse whose job is to make sure that you're okay, that you don't hurt too much. And if you hurt too much, you can let them know and they'll put some medication through your straw. And also to make sure that you get a rainbow popsicle and a blue Powerade. And those kids were across the board generally very okay because they were treated like little scientists. They wanted to know what was the doctor going to do. They wanted to understand how the engineering worked. But then we would also have kids that would come in whose parents would say, oh, we're having a sleepover at the hospital, and didn't want the doctors to talk to their child at all. And we would have all of these potential issues with these kids being terrified because they weren't given the information that they needed because they didn't know what was going to happen. And those kids were always much more frightened. And you're dealing, with almost like a level of PTSD after that. When you've got these children who are so scared because they're not treated like the little scientists that they are, right? And so, granted, I'm a parent and parenting is full of judging. So people judge however they do, and everybody's going to choose what's right for their kid, right? But at the same time, treating them like they're scientists, they reacted so well to that. And now I can't totally remember where I was going. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I'll be honest, it definitely did differ a little bit from the question, but I did kind of love where you were going with that. And actually on that, no, it's perfectly fine. I love hearing everything you have to say. That's the point of this, right? The more we can learn from you, the better the entire experience is. And hopefully the more CNS
Yeah.
actually get out of this.
Oh, I remember now. It was
Uh-huh.
it was that nobody else in my class, as intelligent as they were and how much they had worked in research and different areas, none of them had that kind of experience, right? And none of them had some of the healthcare empathic experiences that I've been able to have too. When you're trying to teach someone something and you know that there's nothing going through their brain other than the immediacy of the situation, right? So like one of the things that we learn in creating medical art, especially for patients, is that just the fact that a patient or a patient family is in the hospital or in a healthcare setting, their health literacy ability is lowered. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Like their ability to take in information is lowered because of the extra anxiety, the extra stress, and all that kind of stuff. Like we always hear about the person who says, oh, my blood pressure is only high when I go to the doctor's office because I'm nervous, right? Like those kinds of things. You're just a little extra nervous for being there. It's not your normal setting. And so your ability to take in information is really lessened. And so we have to be really thoughtful about that when we're making artwork for patients and families. But I mean, within days, I realized how invaluable my direct patient care experience was, and it extended into now. It's still, I don't think I would be able to create things with the entire scope that I can if I hadn't been able to have that experience. And I'm sure that other artists have different experiences that they feel the same way about, but part of it is just to be able to embrace whatever experience you're in and understand that, nothing lasts forever. Enjoy it while you're there, learn from it while you're there. And then when you're done learning, move on.
Yeah, honestly, I really love your mentality about everything. It's just take everything as it comes and, you know, grow through it, you know. So I really appreciate that. And it's really nice to hear like how you wanted to help, you know, kids like have a easier time, undergo like deal with that, maybe some fear about procedures. So it's really awesome what we've done. So earlier you kind of mentioned the Austin Health Council a bit.
Mhm.
So I wanted to elaborate that a little bit more. So you mentioned that you're the marketing director for the Austin
Mhm.
Health Council. So
Yes.
could you maybe talk a little bit about your role and the
Yes.
organization?
Right. So the Austin Healthcare Council takes all of the major CEOs of healthcare organizations and healthcare companies in Central Texas and kind of puts them in the same room. And the whole idea is that if these high level folks are all in the same room talking about their shared problems, talking about the ecosystem as a whole, then we can potentially work toward making Austin the next healthcare innovation center for the country. I'd already felt like medtech in Austin was becoming like it was kind of starting to bubble up as almost like the Silicon Valley of healthcare. And with the Dell Medical School, you know, the way that it is so focused on value-based care and really changing the entire system. And then we have this wonderful entrepreneurial sector and this wonderful IT sector. There's a whole lot that's kind of coming together. And so the goal of the Austin Healthcare Council is just to put all those people in the same room and start building projects and handing them off and building projects and handing them off. And some are community focused programs. So right now, we're working on a couple programs that are really nascent with the World Economic Forum and trying to pull together some public-private partnerships that'll really ideally evolve healthcare in Austin. I started off as a volunteer. I was I think it was one of the Texas Health Co-Lab events, and I met the president and CEO, Gus Cardenas. And I said, what? I didn't even know we had an Austin Healthcare Council. Like, what do you do? What does the Healthcare Council do? And he said, well, we started in 2016, so we're fairly new. But if you want to help out, you can volunteer with the council. And so I started as a volunteer. Danielle Church helped bring me in. And it was mostly just, you know, giving people their name tags, making sure everybody came to the meeting. It was, you know, once a month or so, we'd have kind of a lunch and learn with a speaker. Um, and then after a while, the president was kind of saying, well, you know, my website, it takes a long time to get anything updated. I have to call the company. It takes a couple of days for them to change anything. And we're doing all these events. I feel like it's just not working. And I said, well, I made a website for my company and for my company with my mom. I can make you a website. You can pay me to do that. And so I started there, you know, making his website and redoing the Austin Healthcare Council website. And then from there, it was event management, um, got a lot into graphic design work, so brand management, helped build up their social media profiles. At the time, they didn't have a Twitter. Um, and then from there, moved into how do we market events? How do we do PR? How do we do internal relations with our members? How do we do external relations with the ecosystem as a whole? How do we find new members? How do we make sure our members feel valued and that we're aligned with the goals that they have for the community as well? And that is well outside of my normal wheelhouse, but I started working on some of that work with the Association of Medical Illustrators as well as a volunteer. And so between the two organizations, I'll go, oh, I want to learn how to do this. And I'll go kind of do it for free with one of the organizations. And then I'll go up to the other one and go, oh, hey, you can pay me to do this, you know, and then kind of go back and forth between the two in some ways. That's one of the things I really like to push for folks is the idea that you can get a lot of really, sorry, my baby just got home. You can do a lot of really beneficial volunteer work that you can then pull into your career, right? Like you can volunteer with the group and say, hey, I want to learn how to do this. I want to learn how to build teams. I want to learn how to scaffold teams. And then you can go do that as a volunteer and then take that into your work later too.
You know, I think that's actually like really great advice because I feel like, especially whenever you're at this point and like now during the pandemic more than any time before, students are being really pushed towards, you know, learning new skills, like learn marketable skills, right? And, you
Yes.
know, being able to see like how you use, like you learned those skills and then you're able to apply them almost immediately. Now I know students might not have that same level of success while they're still in undergrad, and it might take a
Of
little
course,
while,
it
but
does. Yeah.
you know, at least it shows that there is a good reason for learning marketable skills, right? And there's a good reason for, you know, constantly going and trying to better yourself. So
Mhm.
that's really impressive, and thank you again for really sharing that with us. Um,
Of course.
we are kind of getting towards the end of the pod or interview, so I guess the one of the last questions I have is,
Mhm.
and this is kind of a serious one, is if you could do it all over again, would you choose the same path for yourself? And if not, what would you change?
I think I would. I mean, you know, if there were anything I could change, it would be being, you know, like I said earlier, being more engaged while I was at UT. I think I would want to have made more friends and been more engaged there. Um, but really, I don't think I would change a whole lot because I feel like each one of those little kind of offshoot things that I get to do influences something in the future. And surprisingly, it's not like I usually have to wait 5 or 10 years to be able to use a skill I just developed. It's like I'll test something out, see, oh, I think I can learn how to do this. And the next thing I know, somebody goes, hey, can you do that? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I just did this. And they're like, great. You know, and because even with Austin Healthcare Council, they were like, can you do social media? And I was like, well, I help run a team of social media volunteers for the Association of Medical Illustrators. And they were like, oh, how big is that? I'm like, oh, we have 5,000, 6,000 followers. They're like, oh, okay, so you kind of know what you're doing. I was like, yeah, sure, kind of. And you just kind of go from there. And part of it is, you know, tackling the imposter syndrome for one thing. I would have started tackling that way earlier. Um, because that can be really hard. When I was first starting my business, I would go to bed at night next to tears, crying at my, you know, then boyfriend, now husband, or I guess he was husband at the time, saying, you know, I'm not, I tell me that I'm not a charlatan, that my work has value and that I deserve to be paid for it. And he'd be like, you're not a charlatan. Your work has value. You deserve to be paid for it. And I'm like, okay, you sound really convinced because I don't feel convinced, you know, but it does take time. It takes listening to the little part of you that says, I don't think I can do this, and then going, okay, why? And just being curious about it and going, why? Why don't I think I can do this? What do I need to do to be able to feel like I can do this? And then what about this can I do? And can I offer to do those things plus a little bit more just to make sure that I'm learning? You know, while knowing fully well that there's nothing wrong with telling people, I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do this, but here's my plan for now. And I'm really excited to see how this goes. You know, and here's, you know, what else do you suggest? And when you're willing to be open with people and tell them, I'm not sure, it opens up a lot because then you start getting the brainstorming ideas between folks and and you can get people invested in the story and they want to help. You know, it's not like everybody doesn't want you to succeed. They want you to succeed, but you have to be willing to kind of find how you're going to do it and find yourself in that process.
Yeah, once again, really, really amazing advice. Like, I know a lot of youth and just college students in general, like they deal with, imposter syndrome all the time, and it's really nice to see that, you just recommended to ask them, why, like they think they can't do it, and then just reevaluate and have a plan so that they can just, grow from the entire experience, just having that growth
Right.
mindset, I think is really awesome. So thank you again for sharing that.
Of course.
I'm really glad
Yeah, and
you said
even,
that.
you know, having a good mentor network could really help with the imposter situation too, because sometimes, you know, and I try to think of it, you know, this sounds kind of basic, but I try to think of it in yoga. Like you're not learning in the moments where it's easy. You're learning in the moments where you're feeling friction and where it's hard. And you have to kind of accept and embrace those moments where something is difficult, where you were, you know, as much as I would like to do something absolutely perfectly every time, I know that that's not reasonable. Like I know that I'm going to make mistakes and I know that those mistakes are going to suck when they happen, but I have to work through them. And it's the working through them and finding out why they happened, how I can prevent them in the future, what might be underlying why I did what I did in the first place, or what the systemic problem may have been that led to this. And then, all right, now let's go and fix it and let's do it. And then kind of, I used to joke that I'd have a glass of champagne every time I made a big mistake, because it's like, oh, I learned something. All right, let's go. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really great to hear again. So I guess we can transition into our final question. It doesn't have to be serious, or it can just be something fun, Um, do you have any parting advice, for any current UT students?
Oh, absolutely. Be willing to reach out to people. I mean, I know I reached out to a lot of medical illustrators, a lot of med tech innovators, a lot of doctors, and just said, "Hey, I have this idea. It seems like, based on my kind of creepy Googling, that you might be interested in this idea. And could you help me figure out how I could do this?" Or, and being willing to contact people. I've never had anybody go, no, I'm busy. And even if they are busy, they're really nice about it. And if it ends up, okay, I'll come back in 5 years and we might discuss this again, or I'll find another route to try to get this idea going. Be willing to reach out to people. They're generally much nicer than you'd expect. And be willing to ask questions and be willing to be curious. And find your mentor network. It takes time. It absolutely does. It also helps if you can find mentees. When you get to a point in your career where you feel like, even if it's high school kids, anybody that you feel like you can kind of help along their path, it's a really good way to force you to walk the walk. I'll talk to some of my AMI mentees about contracts and pricing and all of these different kinds of things, and it forces me to kind of practice what I'm talking about with them. It makes me think, okay, would I accept this for myself just because I really like the project, or would I let my student accept this just because they really like the project? We have to make sure that we're being taken care of appropriately as we go through these things. So
that all makes a lot of sense, and I really appreciate, like we said a bunch of times, we really appreciate you sharing all of this.
of course.
That was our last question. And
Great.
again, this was really amazing. I know I really learned a lot. I'm sure Richard did too. And hopefully this really inspires quite a few CNS students, because I feel like everything you talked about was just so relatable. And so many students are going through similar struggles. And if they're able to find their path, hopefully, hopefully they are able to find their path.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things that helps them along that path. Richard?
Yeah. And if they're ever interested in medical art or any of the variants of things I do, I'm always happy to talk to people about careers and the different types of paths that people go into. My mom was always really good about, like, if we were at Disney World or something, and we'd be like in line, right? We'd be in line to go on a Toy Story ride, and she'd be like, you know what? It was somebody's job to write this movie. It was somebody's job to design these characters. It was somebody's job to animate these characters. It was somebody's job to design this ride. It's somebody's job to make this big, to design this giant Woody doll, and it's somebody's job to paint it. Like, you too could be anywhere on the spectrum. All of the jobs that led to this one thing that we are now in. It's really fun to think about, and just because we all go, all right, doctor or lawyer, and that's it. There's just so much more than that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I feel like, especially with CNS students, there's always that pressure. So I think being able to look at it, take a step back and look at everything as a whole, is just really an amazing worldview. Richard, do you have any closing stuff?
I mean, just to echo Saka once again, thank you so much for being here. Really, really, just, I don't know, I appreciate you for opening up to us and giving us all your stories and just background and experiences and lessons and just advice in general. And I'm sure, like, I hope, I mean, us two have already been, helped a lot through this experience, and I hope, others can be touched by this as well. So just thank you again.
Well, it was lovely speaking with both of you. Thank you so much, Richard and Saket, for having me.
Of course, of course. For the audience, we hope you enjoyed our first conversation. We look forward to seeing you at our next episode. And as always, hook 'em.